A sense of déjà vu here in France as some 21 million people go back into lockdown. Paris, one of the affected cities where non-essential shops are forced to close and people must stay within 10 kilometres of their home for exercise. Talks in Alaska held with a strong smell of gunpowder and drama, according to China, as it trades barbs with the United States. Washington accusing the Chinese delegation of grandstanding during the first meeting of top officials under the Biden administration. And 9 more people shot dead in Myanmar as the military junta continues its bloody crackdown on pro-democracy protests. This doing little to curb the demos as international pressure on ruling generals continues to grow. Welcome to the France 24 newsroom in Paris. I'm Alexander Orcott. We begin here in France, where a new one-month lockdown has been introduced for some 21 million people. This time will be less restrictive than the previous 2. The Greater Paris region is among 16 departments, mostly in the north of France, that are subject to new measures as the government tries to contain a third wave of infections. Catherine Viet has these reactions from the French capital.
A hurried rush to complete last-minute errands before a new lockdown starts. While the measures won't be as strict as previous ones, people will still be required to show a form when they go out, and they can't travel more than 10 kilometers from home. For residents of the capital, it's just more of the same.
Il n'y a pas de souci en vrai, 19h le couvre-feu. Juste ce qui est embêtant, c'est les déplacements. Pour ceux qui ont prévu un week-end en dehors de Paris.
Mes amis sont à Paris en général, donc voilà. J'attendrai pour aller voir ceux ailleurs.
Comme je ne sors pas beaucoup de Paris, ça ne m'apporte pas grand-chose.
Comme certainement beaucoup de gens, je suis un peu en colère quand même de ne pas pouvoir bouger. Moi, c'est interrégion qui me dérange le plus, mais bon, voilà, on n'a pas le choix. Hein.
Et on va espérer que ça sera la dernière fois et que ça sera la bonne.
This go around, there will be no limits on the length of time spent exercising, and the curfew has been extended by 1 hour to 7 p.m. Parks and public gardens will also remain open. But the Paris mayor warned stricter measures could come if people don't respect the rules.
À nous, de façon intelligente et avec évidemment le préfet de police et la police nationale, de faire en sorte qu'il n'y ait pas d'attroupement ou de non-respect des gestes barrières. Mais par définition, évidemment qu'il faut ouvrir tous ces espaces-là.
Officials don't want to see a repeat of the massive crowds that gathered along the banks of the Seine that forced the police to intervene and send everyone home.
Well, these new restrictions and the third wave come as France struggles to deal with its vaccine rollout. Just 5.6 million people have had their jabs so far. This compared, for example, to the UK, which has had more than 26 million. The situation worsened by confusion about the safety of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Well, the French Prime Minister Jean Castex had himself injected with that shot this Friday to try to boost confidence after it had spent days suspended amid fears over blood clots.
France's vaccination programme has seen more ups and downs than a roller coaster ride. And it's been a particularly rocky relationship with the British-Swedish jab, AstraZeneca. Initially, back in January, President Emmanuel Macron questioned the vaccine's effectiveness for people over 65. Then, the country, along with several others, acted on its own, suspending AstraZeneca without final recommendations from the European regulator, this over blood clot fears. Now the French health authorities saying that only people aged 55 and over should be given the jab. And it doesn't come as a surprise that all this reckless talk has dented public confidence.
I won't do it. I don't trust it. They banned it. They brought it back. So there's a problem.
It's going to be very difficult to get this back on track. That is, to get people's confidence back. A good number of them will resist.
This sentiment is echoed by experts.
I must say that there is really confusion across European countries, and I think this is really bad because in terms of, having the confidence of the population, it's a problem. I think that we will have to wait. I don't think it will be very long I think that there are now analyses which are made to test the hypothesis of a link between the vaccine and these very, very rare events.
Now, in a bid to boost confidence in the jab, France's Prime Minister Jean Castex himself rolled up his shirt sleeve in front of the TV cameras. For now, a little more than 1.4 million people have received the first dose of AstraZeneca in France, although it is not known how many of them are under 55.
Moving on to other world news now, and frosty talks between top US and Chinese officials in Alaska have now concluded after each side traded unusually public barbs against one another. China saying from the opening remarks there was a strong smell of gunpowder and drama because of groundless attacks from the opposite side, which raised concerns about Hong Kong, democracy and the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. The US, meanwhile, accused the Chinese delegation of grandstanding.
Setting the stage for fiery future exchanges between the US and China, the two sides wrapped up 2 days of talks in Anchorage, Alaska on Friday. It was the first high-level meeting between the Biden administration and the Chinese government. The talks were a new test in increasingly strained relations between the two countries, which are at odds over several issues, including trade, human rights in Tibet, Hong Kong and China's western Xinjiang region, as well as over Taiwan, China's assertiveness in the South China Sea and the coronavirus pandemic. Issues that the US did not hesitate to bring up during the discussions.
We certainly know and knew going in that there are a number of areas where we are fundamentally at odds, including China's actions in Xinjiang with regard to Hong Kong, Tibet, increasingly Taiwan, as well as actions that it's taking in cyberspace. And it's no surprise that when we raised those issues, clearly and directly, we got a defensive response.
For its part, China said dialogue was the only way to resolve differences, yet also made clear that Beijing had no intention of backing down on any issue. The day before talks began, Washington announced new sanctions over China's crackdown on pro-democracy advocates in Hong Kong. In response, Beijing stepped up its condemnation of what it says is US interference in Chinese domestic affairs.
Meanwhile, China's held a closed-door trial for one of two Canadians who've been held for the past 2 years accused of spying, charges that Canada has described as trumped up. It said its consular officials were not given permission to attend the proceedings despite several requests. Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig were detained in December 2018 in what's widely seen as a retaliation for the detention in Canada of the top Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou. Emerald Maxwell has the story.
The two Canadian men have had almost no contact with the outside world since China detained them in December 2018, charging them in June 2020 with espionage and providing state secrets.
This is Kim's first meeting.
Analyst and former diplomat Michael Kovrig was accused of collaborating with Michael Spavor, seen here on the far right with former NBA star Dennis Rodman and Kim Jong-un. Spavor's family describe him as just an ordinary Canadian businessman building constructive ties with China and North Korea.
North Korea has its challenges.
Ottawa says his and Kovrig's detentions were arbitrary and retaliatory.
It has been over 2 years that they have been arbitrarily detained. We are very troubled by this situation. We're asking, demanding their immediate release, given the nature of their detention.
Beijing detained the Canadians just days after Chinese Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou was arrested in Canada. Meng, whose father is the Huawei founder and CEO, is living under house arrest in Vancouver as she fights extradition to the US, where she faces charges Huawei violated US sanctions on Iran. The two Canadians, meanwhile, have been held ever since their arrest, with even consular visits restricted. Beijing has insisted their detention isn't linked to Meng's case, which it says is purely political. Diplomatic relations between Beijing and Ottawa are at their lowest ebb, but observers say the men's expected convictions could ultimately facilitate an agreement, allowing them to go back to Canada.
Elsewhere, Myanmar's Asian neighbours have called for dialogue to help end the bloodshed in the country. The unusual stance in regional diplomacy comes as the military junta that seized power last month continues with its bloody crackdown against pro-democracy protests, with at least 9 people shot dead by security forces on Friday alone. Well, as Sanam Shantiye now explains, the increasingly violent tactics have done little to deter the opposition movement from taking to the streets.
A face-off between protesters and security forces in a town in southeastern Myanmar. These men are hiding behind barricades to protect themselves. This as police fires rubber bullets into the crowd. On Friday, scenes like this played out across the Asian country by a movement undeterred by the military's violent response, which has been compared to a war by medical workers. 6 weeks after a coup that put them in power, the demonstrators continue to call for the junta's departure, and some are willing to pay with their lives. This video circulating on social media offered a glimpse into police brutality, a woman being forced to carry a sandbag. Now, for police officers defying orders to shoot people, it's a different story. A group of them had to flee to neighbouring India, and they fear they may never be able to return home. And so, as tear gas permeates the air and bullets rain on the streets of Myanmar, the future of its people continues to hang in the balance.
Now to Africa, and history has been made in Tanzania after Samia Suluhu Hassan was sworn in as the country's first female president. The vice president since 2015 replaces John Magufuli, who died aged 61, officially of a heart issue, though it was widely speculated he'd contracted COVID-19. The new president has now urged the country to unite and look forward with hope.
With the Quran in her right hand, Samia Suluhu Hassan took the oath of office. With her swearing in, Hassan has become Tanzania's first female president. She used her speech to call for unity in the face of adversity.
Ni wakati wa kufarijiana, kuoneshana upendo, udugu wetu, kudumisha amani yetu, kuenzi utu wetu, uzalendo wetu, nguvu zetu za pamoja.
The 61-year-old is affectionately known as Mama Samia, a sign of respect in Tanzanian culture. She was first elected to public office in 2000 and rose through the ranks, eventually becoming President John Magufuli's running mate in 2015. It was Hassan who went on television to announce his death on Wednesday. All eyes are now on Hassan to see how she deals with the pandemic. Her predecessor was known for downplaying the seriousness of the virus. The mood is optimistic.
Najivunia Mama Samia kuapishwa kuwa rais kwa sababu sisi wamama tunaweza.
Ndio maana kamweka karibu naye tangia mwanzo. Kwa hiyo hatuna wasiwasi naye kwamba tunaona kama ni mama ambaye ni mchapakazi na anaweza shughuli hiyo.
Hassan will finish Magufuli's second term ending in 2025. Her first order of business, the appointment of a new vice president. The Central Committee of the ruling party has announced it will meet Saturday to discuss candidates.
And finally, well, the past year has been difficult for people around the world. In Scandinavia, Finns have found a silver lining. The country's had one of Europe's lowest death rates from the virus, and that seems to have had a very positive impact on the national mood.
Despite a year of fear, isolation and anxiety, at least one country remains as upbeat as it was before the pandemic. For the 4th year running, Finland has been ranked the world's happiest nation.
I think it just means that we can live safely. We have food, we have clean air to breathe. Our kids have access to school. Anybody can get to the highest position in a society.
It's like the opposite to not to have to worry about something. So things are great.
The annual World Happiness Report ranks people in 149 countries, measuring their well-being based on their own assessments. This year it also included questions about quality of life under the shadow of COVID.
I think in Finland and in the Nordic countries, people are really lucky and have been lucky because the society still supports, there's sort of the system of buffering these kinds of shocks. Most people don't have to completely worry about losing their livelihood or not having access to healthcare.
The authors of the report say keeping an eye on what's further down the track helps people deal with uncertainty.
What we have found is that when people take the long view, they've shown a lot of resilience in this past year.
Finland's successful handling of the pandemic may have also been a factor. It took rapid and extensive steps to stop the spread of infection and has had one of Europe's lowest death rates from the virus.
On that somewhat positive note, we'll end this edition. Stay tuned for more world news on France 24.